Hello there, and welcome to the Old Republic podcast. We recently had a bit of a name shift, kind of bringing all things Old Republic under a bigger umbrella. And today is our 100th episode, so
Yay.
I guess this means we like Star Wars and Kotor. And for this episode, we thought it would be really cool to bring on Alex Kane, the writer behind Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic, the Boss Fights book, and we're thrilled to have him on. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Alex Kane. I wrote that book and published it in 2019. I've written for a bunch of different outlets. I freelanced for like 7 years, and then recently I got a staff editor gig at reviewed.com, which is like USA Today's reviews site. And now I'm kind of playing around with like screenwriting and things like that. So, yeah, you can find my writing all over the place, usatoday.com or Polygon, StarWars.com, Fangoria magazine, places like that.
Awesome. That's really cool to hear you're getting into screenwriting. So this book I read it as research as we were kind of gearing up to create what became this podcast. And so it's really kind of like this podcast is coming full circle. So like, if you can probably hear, like, we're kind of like, me and Brian are kind of like nerding out and freaking out, but yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure. Earlier this year when Cassie asked me to come on and be a co-host on the podcast, she asked me if I had ever read your book, and I said no, and then she immediately said, okay, never mind, don't come on to the podcast then. No, just kidding. She sent me a copy of it, and she wrote me a note and said, here is Alex Kane's Knights of the Old Republic. It's a great and concise book, and I hope we have him as a guest one day, and that day is today. So thank you so much for coming on. It's awesome.
That is awesome. Thank you for having me.
yeah. So everyone has a different path, like how they discovered Star Wars. What was your path?
I guess the short version is that when I was a kid, I was obsessed with robots. So my favorite movies growing up were things like Short Circuit, the Transformers, the movie, Batteries Not Included, things like that, about, like kid-friendly movies with robots. And so my mom would take like me and my sisters to like this place called Hogan's Video, and we would just sort of wander around looking at VHS tapes. And I think that at some point my mom just sort of picked out Star Wars for me, and so I would have seen A New Hope on VHS at a really, really young age. I don't really have a memory of that. What I do remember is when the special editions came out and were in theaters. I talked my dad into taking me to, we missed the first one, and then we ended up going to see Empire and Jedi special edition in the theaters, sort of my hometown theater, where I saw a bunch of movies like Lion King and Titanic growing up. And I think Empire and Jedi back to back, like a month apart or whatever it was. I was 7 years old, so that definitely had an impact. And I got the VHS box set for like my birthday that year, which, funny enough, those weren't the special editions. It was like the other box set from like 95. So,
Okay.
like a lot of guys my age grew up like complaining and arguing over like the differences between the theatricals and the special editions. And of course, now there's a billion different cuts, but that stuff never really bothered me too much. I mean, I have my gripes, but like I sort of grew up watching the theatricals, even though I fell in love with the special editions. And then I was sort of a prequels kid, I guess, after that, because I was the same age as Jake Lloyd when episode 1 came out. I was a big fan of like the Obi-Wan, Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan. So excited to see him coming back soon. And then when the sequels came out, it was like it happened. The magic came back a third time. So, and we really didn't expect that to happen. I don't think people my age. Yeah. Like I was a big fan of like the Force Unleashed video games and, things like that. But I kind of like had moved on from Star Wars. And like when George Lucas said that Revenge of the Sith was like the end of it, I was like, okay, that's fine. And then I kind of went on with my life and kept reading like the Drew Karpyshyn books, that were sort of felt like they were Knights of the Old Republic related, even though they, kind of were their own thing. And and then like The Last Jedi and Rebels and like the Marvel comics recently and things like Mando season 1. And I mean, we've had like a lot of really good Star Wars stuff in recent years. So
yeah,
things like Battlefront and Fallen Order. I sort of have gone on hiatus from Star Wars from time to time, like when I was a teenager and whatnot, but I always sort of find my way back to it. So yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Because I'm kind of like you. I'm old enough to remember these big, long gaps where you think that it's over and then it just comes back and hits you in the face. And now there's just so much stuff going on, so much good stuff right now. It's surreal almost if you step back and kind of look at it. This thing that, kind of goes into hibernation for like 10 years at a time and then just comes back full throttle.
Yeah. And it changes as you age, right? Like your perception of all of it just changes over time. So it never kind of gets old, I don't feel.
Yeah. There was the documentary, the fan documentary, which I think you actually helped with, the prequel Strike Back. Did you help with that?
I contributed to the financing a little bit when I couldn't really afford to do so, but I just was passionate about it and kind of like I thought it was a cool idea, and so I gave like feedback along the way and sort of I don't know, consulted is probably too heavy a word, but I talked to the director Bradley about it and kind of gave my input. But I didn't really get too involved with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I thought they did a good job. I thought it was interesting. It was fun.
Yeah, it was an excellent fan documentary, and it kind of like helped me kind of like see the whole Star Wars saga a bit differently, like kind of like all together, and kind of like it doesn't necessarily like not every part needs to like be like I don't know, super serious, and it's just like it's fun. And there was a good quote in it. It's like, I'm not just watching Star Wars, I'm watching my son watch Star Wars. And I'm like, oh, like you kind of grow up with it, and there's different phases, there's different seasons. But I mean, if you like Star Wars, there's probably going to be something that you connect with. It doesn't mean you have to like everything. And if you like one facet of Star Wars, like, you're still a Star Wars fan. So, yeah. So who is the favorite Star Wars character?
It's changed over the course of my life, I guess. When I got into it, like I said, I was like into robots as a kid. So R2-D2 would have been my favorite character. When I was really young. I think that as a teenager, it was definitely like Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan, with like Luke being sort of right in there with him, and I always liked Yoda, and I always liked the minor characters, the goofy like Dexter Jetster, and just the weird oddball George Lucas things that are in Star Wars. And then of course in recent years I've been a big Kylo Ren, Ben Solo fan, so
yeah,
and I've come to appreciate like other characters that I sort of like Han and Leia and even C-3PO. Like I think if I watch The Rise of Skywalker, I'm like, Anthony Daniels as C-3PO has really been a treat for about 45 years, and I don't think I appreciated that for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. Easy to kind of take for granted that you had him in that role for so long.
So good.
So good in it. Yeah, for sure. But no, I definitely I understand what you're saying because my favorite character also is R2D2 since I was little and still is today. But as I get older, I appreciate other characters more. Like I kind of identify and appreciate like the Chewbacca as a character a lot more now that I'm older. You know, and kind of the sacrifice and the friendship, you know, and kind of being like that binding, you know, of like this family in the galaxy. So I definitely can see how, you know, the way you view characters shift as you age with it.
Oh yeah, like I really didn't pay attention to Chewbacca when I was a kid, but in Rise of Skywalker, when like Chewie cries out and Finn turns to him and says like Chewie and maybe even hugs him or whatever, like I think that's like the most heartbreaking point in that movie, you know, when he loses Leia and Finn kind of comforts him. Yeah, you definitely, as you mature, the movies kind of gain new, you know, it's a completely different experience as you kind of learn to appreciate different parts of them. But yeah, R2 is special for sure.
Yeah, and as a kid, I loved Han and Leia, but now, like, looking at the original trilogy, I'm like, oh, Vader is so interesting now, and like Anakin and Padme growing up with the prequel trilogy, and then I kind of grew into liking Obi-Wan. Just like he's a multifaceted character. He's always like consistent, but you get to see like different. You kind of get to see his evolution from 1 to 6, and that's really cool. And of course, I like Poe and Kylo, and basically I like all the characters. But I think I just
yep.
I guess if I had to like choose some favorites, I guess I would say those. So, kind of related to favorites, you're a big writer. Who are some of your favorite writers and authors?
So in the realm of Star Wars, I think that lately, I think Claudia Gray and Charles Soule get a lot of credit lately. The comics, you know, Greg Pak, you know, Kieran Gillen, like all those comics of the last like 5 or 6 years have been like outstanding. Bloodline was a great novel. Ken Liu's short story collection with, I think it's like The Legend of Luke Skywalker. I'm probably getting that wrong, but that book was amazing.
Yeah,
I think it's The Legends of Luke Skywalker. Yeah, that one's really good. Yeah,
so good. Yeah, I was a huge fan of Matthew Stover's Revenge of the Sith novel, which like people have kind of rediscovered that in the last year or two and kind of like said, oh shit, like everybody told me to read this and like I finally got around to reading it and yeah, it's as good as everybody says it is. And I read that before the movie even came out and to this day I think whatever I feel about the Revenge of the Sith movie, I think is really propped up by how great that book is. Drew Karpyshyn's Darth Bane trilogy. I really love those. The only one I've reread so far from that is the first one. I've read a few times because I just kind of like the idea of the I don't know. There's something really cool about Bane as like this student of the dark side and kind of going off and defying like the Sith institution and to try to make the Sith more powerful, but really he's just making himself more powerful and kind of shows the seductive nature of things that, you know, maybe you kind of view from the outside with like Vader or Kylo or outside of Star Wars, my tastes are all over the place. I'm a big fan of like Stephen King, Joe Hill, the short stories of like Kelly Link. And then I sort of went to a fiction workshop in 2013 and studied under like Joe Hill and Neil Gaiman and wrote like a bunch of stories and read like probably like 1 million words of fiction or whatever. And then after that workshop, I kind of like lost the desire to look at fiction for years.
Right.
Literally I stopped writing fiction for like 7 years or something. and it was very hard to read fiction for a long time. And so that's when my taste sort of veered into nonfiction. And I started, even in college, I got into people like Hunter S. Thompson, like Fear and Loathing. And a lot of my favorite books are just like memoirs and biographies. The comedian Patton Oswalt wrote a book about how much he loves movies called Silver Screen Fiend. And it's like a really beautiful little love letter to kind of like going to the movies and being obsessed with like the craft of that whole thing. And like in the end, he kind of confesses that he wants to be a director, but he doesn't really, know how to go about it. So it's just like this book with him wrestling about this thing he loves. And I think my favorite book, if I had to pick one, is this biography of the comedian Phil Hartman called You Might Remember Me. It's by a guy named Mike Nichols. I haven't really read anything else by that Mike Nichols guy, but that book is just one that I return to as like this really like well-researched, like beautiful portrait of like this tragic life that, was like, here was a guy who had everything and kind of, the circumstances of his death were so shocking and tragic, and his wife's death, that it kind of just overshadowed his whole legacy, and he turned into, the SNL guy who, was tragically, killed. And so, beautiful book. I'm a big fan of books like The Disaster Artist, which was sort of co-written, ghost-written by Tom Bissell, who's written like Gears of War games and stuff like that. I mean, honestly, in the last decade, a lot of my favorite writers are people in comics, people in TV, movies, video games. So, when I think of my favorite writers, I think of things like Better Call Saul. I think of like Twin Peaks: The Return. I think of, Charles Soule and his like Lando miniseries, things like that. Are not the obvious thing to name, like, like Lord of the Rings or whatever, but, this biography of Phil Hartman, whatever, like these are the things that like really get me excited. So, I just sort of follow my curiosity wherever it leads. And I end up reading a lot of, or even like listening to audiobooks of like a lot of random books about creativity or memoirs. I'm not even like really a Rob Lowe fan, but he wrote like a great memoir about acting and, stuff like that can be really fascinating. More recently, I read a book, Andrew McCarthy from sort of the 80s Brat Pack. He wrote a great memoir about acting, and that, I don't know, like I don't want to be an actor, and I don't really have any interest in like studying that craft or anything, but just stuff about like where artists kind of talk about their journey. Like that's always kind of, which I guess kind of leads into the Knights of the Old Republic book in some way, I suppose. But I like stories about creative people. That's a really long-winded, tangential way to answer your question.
Oh, we love it. Like it's good to read and write and watch like a wide variety. I think it kind of keeps people well-rounded. What about you? What about you, Brian? Like, who are your favorites?
I literally in the last 2 years I've just been like binging through all of the canon Star Wars stuff, but I guess more traditionally than that, I do too. I like to read a lot of biographies. The Andre Agassi one is particular one of my favorites, and it's something like that. Same as you, I do enjoy like tennis and watching tennis, but it's not really about that. It's just kind of about getting like a behind the scenes peek. It's someone who's so like dedicated and so spectacular at something, to kind of get like the inner workings of how that works, like in their head and their work ethic, and kind of the behind the scenes stuff. That's what I really like. I really like documentary films, and stuff like that. That's really what I connect with. Like if we're scrolling through like Netflix at the end of the day, I'm gonna choose a documentary like 10 times out of 10 pretty much. And yeah, same kind of carries over to my books. I just like getting, kind of, yeah, like I said, kind of behind the scenes, kind of the inner workings of people's, what they're doing to pursue their craft and things is really fascinating to me.
Yeah. Biographies, like, if you want to see what makes people tick, like, biographies are really good at doing that. For me, I love Raymond Carver, Frank Herbert. I am so excited for the Dune adaptation, and I'm kind of a classics person, so I do like Homer and Virgil and Dante. I know he's like not classic, but he was kind of inspired by them, obviously. And on the Star Wars side of things, like Matthew Stover, like I read that like in 7th grade, and I'm like, this is really good. And like then coming back to it, I'm like, it was probably just me in middle school having not read a lot. And then I was like, this is still so good. And it perfectly kind of captures that tragic fall of a hero, fall of an empire, and the end of the Age of Heroes, and kind of captured that classical feel, I think, too. So, yeah, Matthew Stover, and I do like Claudia Gray and Charles Soule a lot, too. So, yeah.
Yeah, Matthew Stover definitely took a different approach. Like I said, I'd pretty much binged all of these Star Wars novels over the past year, and then I listened to that one, and then I just finished Shatterpoint, which he did as well. And it's so completely different than like any of the other, books, around the same kind of genre. So is refreshing to just see a completely different take on it.
Yeah. And then, Alex, like, what led you into the world of like entertainment writing, like for all the different kind of places you write for?
I mean, gosh, it was essentially an accident. I quit my banking job in 2014, not too long after I attended that writing workshop in Seattle back in 2013, when I wanted to be, sort of the next Stephen King or whatever was kind of my ambition at the time. I quit banking and did freelance copy editing for like some publishers. And at a certain point, the guy who sort of hired me on a contract basis to be like the managing editor of this small press, he just sort of fell off the face of the earth, and like he left me with all this money that he being owed to me, and unpaid salary, and all these authors that he hadn't like paid or anything. And so I was like panicking, and I was like, well, I guess I'm doing whatever someone will pay me to do. And actually, one of the guys who wrote for the video game Disco Elysium, a guy named, I think his name's Chris Priestman, he put out a tweet saying like, any freelance news types, we need people to blog news for killscreen.com, which used to be a really cool website about video games, and now it kind of doesn't really exist anymore, except as like this weird zombie consultancy company.
Okay.
Yeah. At the time, it was like a very hip video game blog. And so I cold emailed him on my phone from the car, and I didn't really have any clips that like were worth showing. So I didn't attach any links, even though I had been published since I was like a college student, but mostly stuff that like I wouldn't want to show you today, you know what I mean? So, so I just kind of emailed him really confidently and passionately, and tried to make sure that the email was well written and kind of got the point across. And I guess he just sort of went, I was 26. This was the beginning of 2016. And he just sort of said, well, like, okay, like I'll let you write a thing and see how you do. And I wrote this like news article about the video game The Division, like basically a news article based on a Reddit post. And there's a great quote by Mads Mikkelsen, I think, in some interview where he said like the most important job of his career is always the one he's doing right now. And that sounds like really made up and like some BS, but you know, I do try to take that approach when I'm working for like a new like freelance client and trying to like do a new writing project, something outside my comfort zone. You know, like I said, it was a stupid little $20 news article for a blog about a Reddit post. And, you know, I just sort of gave him my all at the time, and he was happy with it. And then I went on to write probably like 50 or 100 or 150 like posts for that site.
Oh, wow.
And then they laid off all their editors very suddenly. And then one of the editors got asked to write an article for Rolling Stone about the Halo series, and he didn't feel like doing it. And so he's like, you should email this guy, Alex Kane. He's like a big Halo nerd. And so that was like that, you know, Will Parton saying like, I don't really feel like doing this, like email this guy instead. Like I kind of owe my career to that moment. It's kind of stupid, but you get lucky, and you try to do good work, and you try to be nice to people and leave a good impression, I guess. And so, that was kind of, you never really get a big break in like freelance writing or anything like that. But to the extent that I had a big break, it was writing this Halo review for Rolling Stone. And then from there, I was able to kind of like cold pitch myself to like StarWars.com and say, hey, I've got these Rolling Stone clips. I'd love to write for Star Wars. And that kind of worked. And so I wrote for them for like 3 years. And then I worked on the book a whole bunch during that time. And I wound up getting like solicited by editors for a while. So I sort of established myself for a brief period of time, like around 2019 or so, as like the guy who writes about Star Wars video games, which is not like a bad beat to establish yourself in. And that was really fun. That was really nice. And that's, one of the best periods of my life is like February 2017 through like, like early 2019, like Celebration and stuff. Like that was, and like my book coming out, that was just a really great period of getting to do things that, I like, if I had told my 12-year-old self, I definitely wouldn't have believed them,
Yeah.
Right.
Even now I'm kind of like, I was kind of lucky that I got to do some of those things. So, and then, eventually, I guess, 7 years in, I was like, I'm tired of freelancing. I'm going to start like getting serious about like getting an actual job somewhere with like, health insurance and whatnot. So, So eventually the freelance career, I kind of, just sort of burned out. I don't really read about video games anymore, and I kind of have run out of things to say about Star Wars in some ways.
Yeah.
At least on like the sort of critical journalism side, I've kind of said everything I need to say there. But it's that's sort of how it happened. And I never want to sound like I'm tooting my own horn, because I realized that I was just stupidly lucky and tripped and fell into a lot of cool opportunities. And
Well, we're glad to have pulled you out to talk about Star Wars and video games again. But
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned you're a big Halo fan. Are there kind of like other film series or like video game franchises outside of Star Wars that you're big into?
Gosh, I mean, I'm a big fan of like Bethesda's games, and I sort of wrote a big Morrowind oral history that came out around the same time as the book, and I love Skyrim and Fallout 4, and I mean, gosh, I could go on for a long time, but like things like Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad are really, really important to me. I love that sort of universe. I started collecting comic books around the time of like The Force Unleashed, and like when they were doing the Knights of the Old Republic comics.
Oh, yeah.
At the time I was kind of just like flipping through them and like looking at the art and being like, this is so cool. I wish I like understood comic books. And then my Walden Books went out of business, and then this guy opened like a small bookstore / comic shop in town here, and it was just the coolest place. And I wound up, he didn't have any Star Wars comics in stock for a while, so I kind of just was like, well, I guess I'll check out some of these Batman comics. Apparently Batman is all the rage, and so yeah, I really fell in love with like Batman comics for a long time, and I read like every issue of Scott Snyder's initial Batman run, like the New 52 Batman. I just love that kind of stuff. What else? I mean, yeah, I am a fan of things like Marvel. I am a fan of like most of the DC stuff coming out now. Like I've had a lot of fun with. Like I loved Birds of Prey, and I'm very excited about the new Batman with like Robert Pattinson. I'm excited to see how that goes. I sort of just wander from one pop culture thing to the next and kind of see what really holds my interest. And over time, since I was like a small child, I've been a Batman fan because of the animated series with Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill. So yeah, Batman and Star Wars, and I guess the Transformers. Those are sort of things that have been kind of I've always loved. And then my son is 4 years old, and he is absolutely obsessed with Spider-Man, and so that kind of rubs off on me. And like I've been a big fan of a lot of the comics over the last decade or so, and the Insomniac games. And I always loved like Spider-Man 2 when I was younger, but now I really love Homecoming, and I'm excited about the new one coming out and things like that. So
yeah.
But yeah, I think that Miles Morales Insomniac game was one of my favorite sort of video game stories in recent memory.
Yeah, Miles Morales is so cool. Just seeing Into the Spider-Verse, I love that film so much. So.
Yeah, like I wouldn't have necessarily been as obsessed with it as like a lot of people were, but because I had like a 3-year-old son at home, or however, he must have been 2 or 3 at the time and he just watched that over and over. So we saw it like 100 times because that's what kids do, right? It's like he had his period where he watched like Shrek 300 times and Moana and Thor Ragnarok, and when he got around to doing that with like the Sam Raimi Spider-Mans and Homecoming and Into the Spider-Verse, like I really fell in love with all those characters again. So yeah, Spider-Man is very important in this household. As far as Star Wars is kind of my thing, and I guess my kid likes it, but yeah, it's like Spider-Man and Batman are sort of the big pop culture staples here. And I love horror movies. That's you asked about like sort of IP and franchises. I'm writing a horror screenplay right now, and so
cool.
I'm a big fan of like the Halloween series, Friday the 13th. Very, very excited to go see like Halloween Kills. Stuff like that. I was a big Scream fan as a kid. We've got another one of those coming out now, so Scream 5 or whatever. So yeah, I love all that stuff,
Yeah.
Love the Alien franchise.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And yeah, horror is a good way to go, because you kind of get to do genre, but it usually doesn't cost as much, and like it's very popular with a lot of people. So, yeah, good way to go.
Yeah, they tend to be a little like low risk, high profit when they get made and they do well, I guess. Like Get Out was made for like $4 million, just like nothing basically. And just like exploded. So and that was the case with, many horror movies before that, like Friday the 13th. So yeah, it's a fascinating kind of genre, like horror movies for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, this is being recorded end of August, and when it comes out, it's probably going to be Christmas. But yeah, looking forward to a lot of horror films coming out this fall. But
Yeah.
I guess we could take a quick break, and we'll be back soon.
All right. So I guess now, Alex, the reason we were, so keen on getting you on here, like Cassie had mentioned, you were kind of the catalyst in, getting her interested in starting this podcast, 100 episodes ago. So you wrote this book, BossFightBooks, Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic. Mm-hmm. So how did that happen? Did they come to you and say, hey, we want you to write a book, or were you like, oh, they're writing these books, I am a big fan of KOTOR, and you pitched it to them? How did this book come into existence?
Well, so I went freelance in like 2014, and it was, to get into publishing and become like a writer, and it was sort of the goal, basically, try to build some kind of writing career, whatever that looked like. And I think at some point I just sort of became aware of the Boss Fight books through, a Twitter thing or something, and they put out like an annual call for submissions. They want like pitches from writers and to kind of hear what people want to write about potentially, and each book is focused on one particular game, and so it's sort of, for them, it's about getting like an interesting angle on it. And I want to say that I must have read one of their books or two of their books around like 2015. And I pitched them first on the idea of doing a Halo 2 book because at the time I would have said like, that's my number one favorite game of all time. I was like a huge Halo 2 fan and still am. But it would have been very hard to write that book because I would have just been gushing about how much I love Halo 2. And that's not necessarily interesting to read. I guess the KOTOR book was a perfect storm of me breaking into like games journalism, getting really into Destiny, which reminded me a lot of KOTOR. It like brought a lot of feelings back. It was like, I sort of went freelance and had a lot of free time, got very addicted to Destiny. And I was like, Destiny sort of feels like this weird hybrid of like Halo and KOTOR, sort of in my mind at the time. So those were just the things that I was sort of reminiscing about. And then I pitched them the Halo 2 book, and they sort of sent like a kind reply, and they're like, well, we don't know, like, keep in touch. We'll think about it. They never said no. They never said yes. And then, so the following year, like probably May of 2016 or something, I was like, here's this other idea for a KOTOR book. And the book I pitched was not the book that I wrote either. It was like this weird scholarly critical thing where I was like, I'm gonna delve into the morality system, and I don't know, it would have been like the kind of book that I would absolutely hate to read. And so then Gabe, the editor at Boss Fight, ended up calling me on the phone in like October of 2016, and basically he said, would you rather write Halo or KOTOR? And I just like the timing of 2016, it was like Rogue One was about to come out. Kylo Ren's mask looked a lot like Revan's. there are like all these sort of things in the air that you had Rebels doing things with like Malachor, and the timing was just kind of perfect to like rediscover KOTOR, I guess, for me. And so, yeah, I went with that one, and I'm really glad I did, because there's just like so much to unpack with kind of where this one specific story is situated inside this massive like IP machine, sort of like the Starforge metaphor, I guess, with the, Star Wars is going to kind of outlive me and go on forever, and then they're just going to keep building on it. And for a lot of people, KOTOR is just this special little thing at the heart of it that just kind of never goes away. And so, yeah, between talking to the creators and kind of exploring, like what does KOTOR mean today? It was fun. It was they like Boss Fight was interested in that, and I think a lot of people kind of were excited by the announcement of the book, and I certainly had a lot of fun revisiting the game. So yeah, that's kind of how it happened.
What were the discussions like, I guess, to get it from, what you'd kind of pitched and what you'd kind of imagined to, kind of this behind the scenes documentary kind of book that we ended up with here?
Oh, so yeah, what was it like to kind of pivot? That's a good question. I think that basically I was like, this is definitely what I want to do. I don't know what exactly the influences were at the time. I think a big part of it was like Phil Shostak's art books coming out, and kind of like between that and like sort of reading things like The Disaster Artist, and the fact that I wasn't really interested in sort of like unpacking, I don't know. Star Wars is like this weird thing, and like there's a danger in taking certain aspects of it too seriously. And I sort of saw the pitfalls in what I was attempting to do, and I was like, I'd much rather kind of explore the creative process and do kind of like a making of book, because that's the kind of thing I like to read right now. I liked The Art of the Last Jedi. I liked The Disaster Artist. I didn't want to read about like why Revan is like a good guy or a bad guy or whatever the hell I thought I was going to write about when I started. Well, and the whole like the erasing an identity and replacing it with like a false one, and like I don't know. The book that I pitched was way over my head. It was a great pitch for somebody very highly intelligent and highly educated to write, and I just I didn't want to write that book. So I must have emailed the Boss Fight guys at some point, and they must have been like, cool, sounds good. Because I don't remember any kind of like nervousness about it, really. I think they were enthusiastic. And I think a lot of other people who were working on Boss Fight books at that time were kind of taking the let's interview the creators angle, and so they saw that as like, oh, like good, that'll fit. So yeah, I guess that's as well as I can remember it.
That's awesome, and glad it kind of went that direction, because yeah, I think it's an interesting take to see part of like the game development side of it that you wouldn't normally see or think about, kind of the creatives behind the scenes that are coming up with all of this stuff. So we need to know, I guess. So it sounds like you've been into video games for most of your life, which is pretty awesome. So KOTOR, was that something that you played back in or around 2003, or?
Yeah, it was one of those things that like I found through the internet when it got announced, and LucasArts had like a website dedicated to just KOTOR, and they would post like concept art, and kind of it had this really weird, unique look, and I was like, man, this doesn't really look like Star Wars at all. This is weird. I don't know about this, And so it was kind of just, it got your attention. I think you can still like access that on the Wayback, what is it? The Wayback Machine. You can kind of see
the Wayback Machine.
Yeah, what that website looked like at the time, and it just had this weird sort of brassy, leathery, medieval texture to it that, I guess you do see kind of in like Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, but it looked very different at the time. And so I was just like, I sort of kept up with it. And, this was back in the days of like video game print magazines like Electronic Gaming Monthly and Official Xbox Magazine and Nintendo Power. I like loved that stuff. And that was sort of you know, it wasn't like you wait until the reviews come out and you buy the games that get 10 out of 10. Like back then for me, it was like looking at screenshots and seeing like this weird creature and being like, I don't know what the hell that is, but I'm going to play that game. And that's how I got into games like Morrowind and Knights of the Old Republic and Splinter Cell. It was just seeing screenshots printed in a magazine and reading about them. And so KOTOR came out 6 days before my birthday, like my 14th birthday. So, yeah, it was like my birthday present. And, it was like love at first sight, you know? And yeah, I got really hooked on it. And, yeah, looking back, it was definitely like probably my second or third favorite game on the original Xbox, which, you know, is one of my favorite consoles of all time. So, it had a huge impact on me and the way I looked at Star Wars. And I don't know if like without KOTOR, I don't know that I would have like been such a huge fan over all the years, you know? So
same here, honestly.
You know, yeah, it was really special, and it's still fun to play. You know, I love the combat. I love just kind of the way that you can take ownership of the character and kind of play your own way. But yeah, I'm rambling, so I've kind of forgotten what the initial question was. Oh, but yeah, no, I did. I played it within the first, like either the day it came out or within like a few days of it coming out. And so, yeah, I've always loved it. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So then I guess fast forward, like, I don't know, 15 odd years, and you're, you know, starting to work on this book. Did you like go and drag out the old Xbox and immediately start playing it again to get back into the groove of how this game was? Or did you not really touch it again, or were you just playing it all the time? Or
yeah, so thankfully not my original Xbox, because I once slipped on some ice in front of my house and broke my original Xbox in a book bag, tragically. So I had a second.
So you mean the Xbox didn't like go through the sidewalk?
No, unfortunately, yeah, that first Xbox, like the corner hit the ice and it didn't survive. So I sort of like begged my parents to like have mercy on me and buy me a second one. I had saved up my money over the course of like 6 months to buy my first Xbox, and so that slip and fall on the ice just killed me. And they felt bad for me and they bought me a second Xbox, and I still have that thing miraculously. And so now Knights of the Old Republic and Morrowind and a bunch of other games are backward compatible on like the Series X and stuff, which is awesome. But yeah, when I started working on the book and working on that Morrowind oral history, like I did have to dust off the old school Xbox and play it that way. And so, yeah, I've since replayed it, you know, on both ways, like the original Xbox and, you know, backward compatibility where it's like buttery smooth and stuff and looks a little better. But yeah, that was cool to kind of like hold that same disc from 2003 again. You know, I'm glad I held on to that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think looking back, my favorite games come from like I was like on the PS2 side of things, PS3, like, I don't know, there's something kind of special about like before everything kind of went online and got super high def, you know, like I do like games nowadays, of course, but like, I don't know, it kind of seemed like a little bit like it wasn't like really about the graphics, it was about kind of the world, the design, the gameplay, and the story and characters. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like abstract impressionistic painting. Like it's you only have like so many polygons that you can like handle, the hardware can handle. And yeah, they had to make tough choices, like can the memory hold like Jedi robes on the characters, you know? And it's like they had to make sacrifices. And so like what you see in something like Mario 64 and Knights of the Old Republic, it's like this weird snapshot of time, you know? Now we have like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart and Miles Morales, and it's like, how can games get any better? Like, it seems, you know, they're so good now. But back then it was like they had, there's this great quote, and I don't know what the quote exactly is, but Brian Eno, who's like a music producer, musician, composer guy, one of those intelligent British music nerds, and he says like the technological constraints of art are like what makes great art or something like that. And I think, you know, I look at old Nintendo 64 games and people see this ugly broken thing, and I'm like, no, that's like, it doesn't get any better than that. What are you talking about? You know, and PS2 is the same way, of course.
Yeah, definitely the creativity through constraint. Yeah, it made, at least for, you know, people like us, like Cassie and myself, it made, you know, the story that much more important and impactful, I think, to see it in those settings. Because like you said, now, you know, Ratchet and Clank's loading an entire world, you know, before you can even like blink your eye to see it happen. So
it's wild.
Well, so speaking of kind of the restraints and things, so when you were, you know, doing the research for the book, was there one aspect, or, you know, maybe a couple of aspects or things that you learned, maybe about Kotor itself, but maybe just about kind of the video game industry as a whole? Were there some things that surprised you to learn about what that process was like?
So I wrote about video games in sort of like a professional or semi-professional capacity for like 4 or 5 years. And the thing you come out of that learning is that video game developers are not transparent. They really don't want you to know the sort of blood and sweat that goes into these things. They don't want you to see how ugly the product is until it ships. And you know, of course, there's a lot of like labor discussions that happen about, you know, people like Rockstar Games going, haha, we worked like 94-hour weeks, you know, making Red Dead.
Right.
And people go, you did what? You know, and so Kotor, like talking to those guys like sort of 15 years after the fact or whatever, they were able to be pretty, obviously their memories weren't perfect, but they were able to be pretty like candid about it and be like, this is what it was like to work at BioWare in 2001. And, you know, these are the things that worried us. And these are, you know, the things that we wanted to do and weren't able to. And so it was just a very good kind of crash course. And it's not like I wrote the book in a super short span of time. I sort of procrastinated for a long time, sort of terrified of it. You know, I sort of signed the contract and then like flailed like Kermit for a year. And then eventually was like, oh shit, I got to write this thing. So I worked on it for a good like year and a half and then sort of revised it and stuff. But it taught me the things that I needed to know to cover like video game development in a meaningful way, like in other projects and other articles and things. And so that Morrowind oral history that came out probably a month before the book, you know, I look at it and I'm like, I sort of like knocked that off in like the course of a month or something. But you know, it took me like 2 years of working on the Kotor book to get to the point where I was even capable of like doing something like that. So, video game development is like this big, messy process that, you know, today, like game developers like Insomniac, they're able to deliver games like Miles Morales and Ratchet and Clank in the span of like 6 or 7 months. You know, back then, developers didn't know what the hell they were doing. And so that's a really fascinating thing about talking to these guys from like Bethesda or BioWare. You know, I wrote an oral history of like Spider-Man 2 that Treyarch did.
Such a good game.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. And the sort of running theme of talking to people about games that came out 15, 20 years ago is that they really just had no idea what they were doing most of the time. You had a lot of smart, talented 23-year-old, you know, people, just kind of who loved games and they just wanted to try things and they hoped it worked out. And so, yeah, I mean, that a lot of it was sort of coming away from it, realizing how little, how sort of, what am I trying to say? How immature and undeveloped the industry of games was back then. And so when you have stories coming out today about, like horrible toxic culture at Blizzard or like horrible crunch at Rockstar or Naughty Dog or what have you, it's like you can kind of see like how we got here, by looking at some of those older games and, it's like Nintendo when they talk about like how they made Breath of the Wild or they made like some Mario game like decades ago. It's like the exception that proves the rule in some cases. Like, the industry, has really just only recently kind of figured out, how to be a healthy kind of thriving, art form the way that, movies have probably been for a much longer period of time, in some cases. So.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting to me, like you said, because things were moving so fast and like the size of these games blew up so fast, and I think they were just trying to, struggling to kind of keep up with it, and it just kind of bred, kind of those situations. But yeah, that's really interesting to get kind of, like I said, kind of a behind the scenes look at, what went into it and on these teams and kind of these different creative mindsets all coming together. So that's really cool, I think.
And just how much of that game came from like tabletop, like D&D and that whole kind of culture that was sort of alien to me until, maybe 2014 or so. I didn't really grow up around like D&D and stuff. So I guess like KOTOR, the book surprised me in that way too, like to discover that Drew Karpyshyn and like all these guys, they were really drawing from this whole other sort of IP and culture that was pretty foreign to me. So that was kind of fun to wrestle with that tension of like feeling like I was sort of an expert on Star Wars, but really didn't know anything about, tabletop D&D beyond like the one time that I had played it at that point. So
yeah. Now, to get back to KOTOR, and I guess I want to ask you two ways, because we talked a little bit about your favorite Star Wars characters and how you'd said they kind of had evolved as you'd aged. So we want to know who your favorite KOTOR character is. Who was it in 2003, and who was it at the end of writing this book? Or when you're done writing the book, you're like, done with KOTOR, and never want to look at it again?
I might have said if it was 2003, I would probably be like, well, obviously, like my Revan was really important to me, and blah blah blah, and I would have also given the pretty predictable HK-47 answer probably back then. I think now, in more recent years, since the book came out and working on the book, like I think Bastila would be like my number one. I'm also really impressed by like Juhani as a character. I think even seeing fan art of KOTOR like around the last 3 years or so, I've like kind of come around on like Darth Malik. Like he's kind of a cool character in his own weird, goofy way.
Yeah, Malik's jaw doesn't do him any favors. Like there's like two Maliks in my head, like the goofy jaw, and then I was like, oh, he does kind of have a tragic backstory, like that people could get into, but mostly sometimes I just see the jaw. So
yeah, the comics kind of built him up more, I guess, and I should go back and read even more of those. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I like all the characters, I guess, in various ways. I always thought like Zalbar's dialogue was good. I've pretty much always felt the same way about Karth, which is that like people are a little hard on him, and I think he's pretty cool. But
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, I guess I really like Bastila and the whole concept of battle meditation, and she kind of has this parallel with Rey, and kind of the way the Jedi Council regards Bastila is similar to the way our culture regards Rey, I feel like, which is that, like, she has this sort of unharnessed, like, dangerous, like, feminine power, which is like, you know, in Rey's case, it's the whole just being like a badass Jedi who's a little unhoned, and then in Bastila's case, the, you know, battle meditation, like changing the course of the war, and like, even though I think she's referred to as sort of a Padawan, so I'm sure you guys will correct me if I'm wrong about that, but
yeah.
You know, I think that's fascinating, that that whole, the idea of like a young untrained Force user being like really dangerous for a number of reasons, kind of the way, you know, Anakin is like 9 years old, but he's too old to train, and then Luke is certainly too old to train in Empire. You know, it's like, you know, their power is too great, they can't control it, and then you get like the Ben Solo type tragedies that come out of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I think Bastila is really cool. Like the fact that she, you know, falls to the dark side and then comes back from it, which I guess like Revan did the same thing, but his was sort of like not his choice. Whereas Bastila, like, she sort of consciously makes that decision to, you know, come back from the darkness or whatever. So
yeah, it's a little bit like a ring theory. Brian and I kind of noticed that, like, after watching the prequel Strike Back and kind of becoming more familiar with Mike Klimo's ring theory, but I think people are too harsh on Karth, and I'm like, you know what? Like, sometimes people don't want to talk about it, you know? And he's been through a lot, you know, like losing his family, his planet, his son, and like being betrayed by, like, you know, his boss, you know? And I do like your answer about Bastila being your favorite, because I think, like, playing KOTOR, like, Karth and Bastila were always, like, my favorites, but I kind of have come to understand, like, them, like, a bit more as characters doing this podcast, and Bastila's kind of the one who, she's kind of, like, trying to present herself as an Obi-Wan, but she's much more of an Anakin, and...
yeah, mm-hmm.
And... she's kind of the one who makes the choice that, like, kind of, like, makes the whole plot happen. Like, she decides to spare Darth Revan, and, like, she kind of, like, starts out conflicted, you know, conflicted good, kind of, like, just rehashing dogma, and then kind of, like, falling to the dark side, and then kind of, like, coming out of it and kind of, like, becoming the best version of herself, kind of a synthesis of her experiences. And I was like, oh, that's like a really cool arc, and like she kind of made it all happen. And I like what you said, like kind of connecting Bastila with Rey, and like I think if there were to be a remake or an adaptation, I hope that it wouldn't just be the Revan show, you know, like they would be able to highlight a lot of the other characters of KOTOR.
Yeah, I sort of have like this idea in my head, this pitch of like what, you know, my ideal KOTOR adaptation would be in like the realm of like movies and TV. And I think that Bastila to me is the main character of the story, and Revan is, you know, he's more of this like force, or you know, she or they, or you know, whatever Revan is to you know, the player in question. But to me, Revan is more like this sort of like mythical figure that kind of, you know, sort of like in Apocalypse Now you have the Colonel Kurtz, you know, or whatever. You know, I think Revan works better in that kind of place in the story where you're trying to understand this really complicated figure from the outside, you know, or like the movie Steve Jobs, that it kind of shows Steve Jobs as this really complicated, he's kind of an asshole. And, I don't think that movie, but I love that movie a lot because of the way you get all these sort of viewpoints on him. And, like it wouldn't work without, I think it's like Chris Ann and, I can't remember the main character's name, but Kate Winslet's character is sort of the main character in that, the sort of audience proxy character who, like, without them, the story is just like this guy being a dick in isolation or whatever, and it doesn't really work. It's not a story. So I think for me, like, Bastila is the main character of Knights of the Republic in my view. And, people would say that in the original trilogy, they would call Darth Vader the main character and not Luke. And I don't really subscribe to that anymore, but there's a compelling argument to be made, I guess. And, certainly as time goes on, the way I look at Bastila as a character has really evolved. And maybe The Force Awakens and Last Jedi and stuff has like helped that along. But yeah, I definitely see her as kind of the more the character with agency in the story, and Revan in his sort of mind wiped form is sort of like a more of a passive observer, kind of like sort of stumbling through the story, like I don't know. Yeah, like in a lot of like Jyn Erso is a little bit different than Rey, right? Whereas in The Force Awakens, it's really about Rey like seeking the things that she wants, whereas Jyn Erso is like, my dad is the guy who built the Death Star, and so she's sort of getting dragged through this like crazy series of events. It's sort of like a different sort of way a story can be told. And I really like looking at Kotor as sort of Bastila's story, even though I don't know how common that is. It's just something I've thought about in the last few years.
That's a great take. Brian and I, we do pitches of like a Kotor trilogy. It's never gonna happen, but we just have fun pitching it like on our podcast. And like, I think like when we're kind of in the middle of like the second film, we're like, wait, maybe we didn't come to the same point of view that you did. But I was like, this is almost just as much a Bastila's story, like in the mid-tier of our proposed trilogy that's never happening, and it's like, this is just as much her story, and I hope like if it were to be adapted, like giving her more attention and agency, that would make it really cool, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's because the player character Revan is almost just the catalyst to tell everyone else's story in there, and that's why it works so well as a role-playing game, because Revan could literally be anyone, because he just exists for all of these other stories to be told kind of around him, and conversely it kind of moves his story forward then. So I definitely agree it would need to focus on some of the other characters and any kind of an adaptation for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of basically most of the companion characters in KOTOR 1, and I want to say a lot of them in the second game as well, like they sort of go through that same sort of fall that Revan has, and so they all kind of pick themselves up, I think, as sort of their arc, where so it ultimately becomes about this sort of fall from grace and redemption. Like Juhani goes through that, Bastila goes through that. I think Karth has his own version of it, maybe, with the whole revenge thing. And I think the Zabrak guy in KOTOR 2, whose name is eluding me, I think he's got a whole like Revan backstory to him, I think, and then the exile. So at the end of the day, Star Wars is kind of like people make mistakes and then they learn from it and grow, ideally, or they get consumed by the dark side. And so I think that's a fun metaphor, and they certainly continue to lean on that with Ben Solo and all the other, Darth Maul even is basically kind of this big, larger than life character now who has a big arc like that. So
yeah, I'd like to see more redemption through like living atonement rather than redemption equals death, but maybe that's a whole other topic for another day.
Yeah, it's a huge podcast unto itself, and it'd make a lot of people very happy and a lot of people very angry. But I do love that theory that like maybe Darth Maul is like still alive even after Rebels. I love that idea that Ben Solo, he's trapped in the world between worlds somewhere. Like hell yeah, go crazy. Like sure, why not? Yeah, I love that stuff. Yeah, I definitely subscribe to the idea that troubled young people kind of need stories that show them like that they're people aren't lost forever, and there is hope and redemption and forgiveness. Like I think these are like good things. So yeah, I like the scene with Ben and his father in Rise of Skywalker, and I think Star Wars does that well. It works well as kind of a metaphor for adolescence and things.
I think anyone, no matter what their feelings are about Rise of Skywalker, like everyone loves the Ben and Han scene, and I think it's one of like the best scenes in all of Star Wars. So
yeah.
So if BossFightBooks asked you, do you think you would do the Knights of the Old Republic 2 book, or would you say like nah, maybe another?
I mean, I think there's definitely like a good story to be told there. I don't think that I'm the person to write that book. It's just the honest truth. Like I love the first game like so much, and the second one like I played through it once or twice. I think I beat it once basically, and it's just the writing is spectacular. The characters are great. I just it's the difference between Halo 2 and Halo 3. Like, I'd sit here and talk for 6 hours about Halo 2, and then Halo 3, I'd get bored after about 15 minutes of talking about it. And it's not that I don't like the sequels. It's just that, I don't know, just certain things resonate differently. And I love Kreia. I love a bunch of the supporting characters in KOTOR 2. I think the planets and the lightsabers and how they got the Jedi robes to look and stuff. Like I love all that stuff. But yeah, I don't think I could write a book about it, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, it is. It's almost like that Knights of the Old Republic is like The Force Awakens, and like Knights of the Old Republic 2 is like The Last Jedi. It's like you get two very different kind of modes of stories being told, and it's interesting. Like I love KOTOR too, but it's almost like the original KOTOR was like an homage to the original trilogy, and then
yes,
Knights of the Old Republic 2 is like kind of like a deconstruction and almost like a literature course, like about like philosophy, like just with Kreia, and totally
You're
different
absolutely
experience.
right.
So
You're absolutely right. Yes. And the things that I loved about The Last Jedi so much are probably the same things that pissed me off about KOTOR 2. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Right.
So again, it goes back to like the things that you like with Star Wars, or the way you respond to things changes over the course of time. And so the things that, I replayed a good chunk of KOTOR 2 while I was writing the book or revising the book and things like that. And like I appreciated it so much more than I did when it came out, I think, in terms of the story. I found it kind of dull and hard to follow when I was 15 and, would rather be playing Halo. So, but yeah, going back to it now, I see that it is a lot like The Last Jedi. It's like very smart, very well written. So yeah.
Yeah. As a teenager playing KOTOR 2, you're kind of like, what is this lady talking about? And then, like, as you get older, just like, I'm like, oh my goodness, like Kreia, like there's some really good thoughts here. Apathy is death, and like just like on Nar Shaddaa, where no matter what you do, if you help or not help the homeless person, like it just is kind of like what you did is futile, but apathy is death. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, wow, so deep, you know? And yeah, so some Kotor, you know, some people like one or two, some like both, but yeah. So it would be interesting to see if there is ever a Boss Fights book on Kotor 2, though.
Yeah, and I think that would be likely to happen someday, yeah. I mean, Boss Fight's going to probably publish books on anything that is considered a classic that people would want to read. Probably, you know, any Final Fantasy or Zelda is eventually going to get a Boss Fight book. So I feel like the right writer will at some point pitch KOTOR 2, and it'll be spectacular and better than my book, and I'll love reading it. But yeah, it's so weird how the things that people say about The Last Jedi that sort of like make my blood boil. I look at my feelings about KOTOR 2 and I'm like, I see what a hypocrite I am. And I think that's kind of the beauty of Star Wars, is that at the end of the day, we all take it a little too seriously. But, you know, I do love that line that Kreia has about, like, you know, maybe Revan never fell. And when I hear that, I'm like, that sounds like bullshit that just sounds good as dialogue, and I don't really believe it about the character. Like, I think he fell to the dark side, but it just gets you thinking. It just makes you ask what if. It gets you in that philosophical mode that good Star Wars, you know, thrives on. Things like Rebels and The Last Jedi. So, yeah. I do love KOTOR 2 for that.
Yeah. For Revan, I think it was a slope going into the dark side, not a abrupt fall. But yeah, it's always interesting. But what would you say is the most surprising thing that you learned writing the Knights of the Old Republic Boss Fights book?
Surprising. Well, like there were just a lot of like little things about like the planet Slaheron, like, you know, that got cut, you know, things like that. Little behind the scenes stories, where a lot of that was kind of news to me as I was researching the book, and so stuff like that comes to mind, and just kind of how like normal and just everyday people like made the game, you know, like people who were kind of in over their heads, and they were just like some D&D nerds who, you know, like to draw, or they like to tell stories, or, you know, Casey Hudson, you know, like computer whiz who liked games, and, you know, like these people who go on to like make Dragon Age and make Mass Effect and like build these $200 million MMOs. Like they started out as just some nerd who played D&D at his house in Canada, you know, or whatever. Yeah. I think that's always inspiring and humbling to kind of learn that stuff, and getting to know, you know, a couple of those people was really rewarding, you know, creatively. And if the book is any good at all, it's because I, you know, felt connected to in some way to a couple of those guys who got to work on the game, and you know, really kind of understood where they were coming from, and like how cool it was that they got to do those things. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I think we can all imagine like the thrill of like getting to called on to make a Star Wars game or something like that. So it was an easy in.
Yeah, that was one of the interesting things I found in the book. And if you just look at like BioWare as a company, there's a lot of the same core of people. So they would do a project and then kind of graduate to the next one. So they were always just, you know, kind of flying by the seat of their pants, trying to figure out how they were going to do whatever came next. Because it was, you know, a lot of the same people working on these projects, like you said, all the way up to, you know, these huge, massive things, Mass Effect and SWTOR, and just crazy stuff. So
I think the thing that I was kind of surprised when I read it was like, oh wow, like it kind of just comes back to D&D. So it's like kind of what you do growing up or with friends, like kind of like builds who you are, what you create at work. So that was a cool detail to learn. Like some of these names are from D&D, sessions, and that was cool. So is there like a boss fight book or an entertainment story that you think you would love to read, or like needs telling, or that you would be interested in reading?
Well, I did have like a pitch for book number 2, and so somebody who is a more successful author than I kind of was chatting to me about that one point, and said like, so what's your next book going to be? And I was like, well, I have this crazy idea. And so I sent him an email about it. I guess with his intention being like that he was going to like look at it and maybe like pass it along to like his agent or something. And I think he got busy with projects, and then I never really heard back about it, but I did love the pitch. And the pitch was Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4 that got canceled, and just kind of, there was that big Sony email hack, and so like all these sort of weird what ifs, and of course now we're sort of living through that weird, we're living in the age of like maybe Toby's going to be in the next movie, maybe he isn't. Alfred Molina sure is, and then there's the whole Tom Hardy Venom universe, and this sort of weird like anything goes war of the worlds with IPs that we're living in. That would have been really fun to kind of talk to concept artists and writers and anybody who was sort of attached to Spider-Man 4. I think it was going to star I think John Malkovich was going to be the Vulture, and I think maybe Anne Hathaway was going to be Black Cat, and that was kind of the direction they were going with it. And there's a lot of cool like concept art on the internet and stuff, and so sort of my aspiration was to like get Sam Raimi to talk for a few hours about what his hopes for Spider-Man 4 were before it was canned. And I haven't really thought about that pitch a whole lot in the last like year and a half, but because I've sort of been, trying to get back into like thinking more creatively and stuff. But yeah, that's absolutely like a book that, if one of the big publishers was like, yeah, we'd love that book. And I even had like a great title for it and stuff. Yeah, I'd love to write that book someday if I could get Sam Raimi to sit down for a couple hours.
Yeah, maybe 15 years later, like.
Yeah.
So you've been writing about the Bad Batch. Are you looking forward to season 2 of the Bad Batch, or is there like another project in the Star Wars universe you're looking forward to as well?
Yeah, I mean, writing those recaps for the day job is really fun and rewarding. I mean, like on those days where I got to like wake up and like pour a coffee and like watch Loki for work or watch the Bad Batch for work, like those are pretty good days, and I don't take them for granted. So it's my hope that I'll get to keep recapping things like Hawkeye and Book of Boba Fett. Yeah, I think Bad Batch is really solid, and I think for a first season, it really kind of was firing on all cylinders more often than I think Rebels is my favorite animated show.
Yeah,
but I wouldn't say the first season was anything special. It's really like season 3 and 4 that make it so special for me. And yeah, I think Bad Batch just. They got good writers. They got good, fruitful ideas about, what happens when the clones are obsolete and the stormtroopers, come in and take their place, and all that sort of weird stuff with like the cloning that they've, they have this weird problem where Rise of Skywalker, tried to explain things without explaining them. And so now we get to kind of fill in the gaps with Putty or whatever and be like, so what is Snoke and where did he come from? And what's the whole thing with Rey's parents? What the hell is going on? And, that's fun. Like, that's cool. I mean, the thing that really excited me about Rebels for a long time was just that whole notion of the world between worlds and there's like time travel in Star Wars now. What the, so I think that when a story like Rise of Skywalker, it like leaves some jagged edges, it ultimately, good things come from that. And you get to kind of unpack, meaningful aspects of the universe for like years to come. And so, I didn't care that much about the clone troopers, for a long time, but, Bad Batch, did a good job of like making me care. And I think Omega is a good hook,
Definitely.
Yeah, it does a lot of the same things that the Mandalorian did, but, the sort of, instead of Grogu, like just being like a cute baby, like you have Omega as sort of like the smartest, most like empathetic character in the show. And so it's a very different dynamic, even though it's sort of doing the same thing.
Yeah. For me, like, Bad Batch really came together, like, in the finale. I'm like, I finally kind of, like, all the pieces, like, came together, and I'm like, I'm on board. Bad Batch is amazing. Love it. What about you, Brian? Like, what do you think about the season?
Yeah, so as a whole, I absolutely loved it. Now, going through the individual episodes, there wasn't really one that stuck out as something that I didn't like, but I didn't necessarily see how the pieces were coming together in a satisfying way. But as the season, kind of progressed and wrapped up to an end, kind of put a neat little bow on the first season. And I liked it a lot. Like you, I think Rebels is probably my favorite of the animated shows so far. If I'm thinking of my favorite individual episodes, they're probably coming from Clone Wars, but the show as a whole is Rebels. But I really like the direction that the Bad Batch is going. I don't think anyone was all that surprised when they announced the second season, so I'm excited to see where they're able to go from here now that they've kind of laid the groundwork for who these characters are and what their motivations are, and kind of the state of the galaxy, kind of right in the immediate aftermath of, Order 66 and all that stuff. So
yeah.
You guys mentioned that living redemption or whatever, living atonement. Living atonement, I think was what you called it earlier. Like, just the fact that like Crosshair is still alive at the end of season 1, like, it makes me care about the show so much more. And just the way those last 3 episodes were just so solid that it had a lot of momentum by the end.
Yeah. No one had better kill Crosshair. Or else I'm going to lose it. So.
Yeah, for sure. And it's certainly breathtaking to look at. The animation team, spectacular job. So
I think the Camino in Bad Batch looks as good as it did in like episode 2 at this point. Like, it just looks so good.
Yeah, looking at the Clone Wars movie and season 1 and 2 of Clone Wars and just looking at Bad Batch, and it's like, night and day, absolutely. So, yeah. And then when you do reviews of the Bad Batch, do you is it one and done and you kind of have like your review in mind, or do you do multiple viewings?
Rarely would I watch it one time and just like crank it out, because I don't really trust my memory is not very good, I think that when I was like a kid, I would have said I had a photographic memory and I remembered like everything that ever happened to me, but the last like 10 years or so are kind of a blur. And I can watch a movie and like talk to my friends about it or whatever, and I'll kind of forget about a whole scene or the first time because my attention is sort of fixated on specific things. So usually I'd watch it at least twice. Watch it once for impressions and like thoughts, and then the second time like making extensive notes about what happens and what I think about it. You know what I mean? And then so it's sort of a 3-step process. It's like watch the episode like anybody would, and then the second step is basically outline my recap and take notes about what happens, think about it, and then step 3 is just like write the thing and send it off to my editor, basically.
Yeah, that's a good way of doing things, because I'm like, when it comes to Star Wars, like, sometimes I'll walk out of the theater thinking one thing, and then I see it a few more times, and then just like maybe a year or so, and then like maybe 5 years later, I'm like, oh, it's changed, so sometimes you just kind of can't just go with your gut reaction, and I think the best reviews kind of come from a place of nuance and kind of just seeing things play out a few times. So
yeah, I just marathoned all the Star Wars movies recently just for like something to do, and like my rankings like completely changed from the last couple years. So it really is crazy how the things you thought you hated or the things you thought were your favorite, it really does kind of evolve over time. So
yeah.
Now, what order did you watch in?
So interesting. The Sky Talkers podcast proposed.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I don't know if you saw that, but it's called like the nesting order.
And like the Russian nesting dolls. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, this is weird enough that I want to try it, and because I already had the idea of like I want to watch like episode 1 and then episode 9 like after it, and just try things like that and see how the different movies kind of interact with each other, like visually and thematically and stuff. And so it goes like Force Awakens and then Last Jedi, and then you sort of go back to A New Hope and Empire, and then you watch the prequels, and then you watch Return of the Jedi, and then you watch Rise of Skywalker. And it was fun. It was interesting. It made me a lot more content with the Rise of Skywalker than I, sort of like, instead of being like my number 11, it's more like my number 7 or 8 now, so I sort of made peace with that movie. And even though there's like certain things that I absolutely hate about it, like when you watch the nesting order, as they called it, like it kind of fixes some things in my mind, but and then I just sort of randomly watched like Rogue One and Solo after that, and those rankings stayed the same. I think Rogue One pretty much stayed at the bottom, and Solo stayed in the middle, and like whatever. I like those, but I like pretty much everything Star Wars, but I just have my sort of weird fascinations, and I'll always be like an Attack of the Clone apologist, and I'll always be like, Rogue One isn't as good as you think it is. I'm just, you know how it is. Opinions are weird like that. It just kind of, some things,
Attack of the Clones. Ugh. Like, it's a beautiful movie, and like, maybe it's not the best executed, but I'm like, oh, it's just so interesting. Like, Anakin and Padme's romance is like, I think it actually was, like, the dialogue and acting isn't always, like, on point, but I'm like, It is interesting what they're kind of doing. Like, they're setting up a romance doomed to fail, and I'm like, I think it works, Like, and just a lot of different things kind of going on in that movie, and it's endlessly interesting, and I'm going to be doing a podcast episode with Galaxy of Film talking about it, so I'm looking forward to bringing more nuance to that discussion. But like, what's your order, Brian?
So the last time I went through all of them, I just did in episodic order. So we did 1, 2, 3, Rogue One, Solo, A New Hope, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I went that direction with it. But I am interested in doing, either the nesting doll order or in the ring theory, kind of that order, just mixing it up a little bit and playing around with it. And like I said, seeing if it sheds some different perspective on it. But the last time I did it, I just did it kind of straight chronological order.
Yeah. I do 1, 2, 4, 5, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, like chronological, but the twists are mostly intact. So, and then I just watch Rogue One or Solo whenever. But yeah, there's lots of different ways to Star Wars, and that's the fun thing. So,
definitely.
Yeah. So if you were in charge of all the things, what's next for the Kotor story? Like, would it get an adaptation? Would it be an animated show or a new video game?
So the sort of prevailing open secret / rumor with the video game side of things is that there's likely a remake of sorts or reimagining in development at Aspire Media or Aspire Games or whatever the studio's actually called. And they've been like handling the ports of the KOTOR games for years on like mobile and Mac and stuff like that. And so they really know the games inside and out. And I hope that that's true and that it gets released and that it's great. I do think that sort of like a more canon-friendly version that maintains like the spirit of the original, that sounds like a really good, not compromise, but like, that sort of best-case scenario,
Yeah.
I think that the original game for me is still just as almost perfect as it once was. I don't think I have a lot of complaints about it, but you have younger people who play it and they're like, oh, these graphics are horrendous. I can't take it, save me from this awful game. Yeah. And, so like whatever gets people to like experience KOTOR in some way is cool. And, I would want it to have turn-based combat, and it sounds like the rumor is that this reimagining won't, and so I'm gonna like probably have mixed feelings about it, but I'm sure it's gonna be gorgeous, and I'm gonna love the story and seeing it retold with like new, probably stronger writing, because video game writing is just way better now than it was 15, 20 years ago. So yeah, I definitely have a lot of thoughts for what my ideal like movie version or like what my dream Star Wars game would be. But a reimagining of KOTOR that just looks great and is kind of updated for modern gamers or whatever. Like, bring it on. Like, I'll eat that up. So,
yeah, new KOTOR stories, bringing in new KOTOR fans, like. Something we can, like, old and new, can probably, like, both enjoy. So that's my hope. So, yeah. I definitely think there will be a game, and then it'll probably get some mentions, in the High Republic, that's already been happening, and Disney Plus shows, I think. So, Did you have any KOTOR fan casts at all?
I did a Twitter thread about 2 or 3 years ago, and I linked to it on Facebook for whatever reason, and actually the guy who was the director for the concept art on KOTOR gave it sort of the thumbs up, and so I was canon. Pretty happy with that. Yeah, so I remember most of it. I delete my tweets every like 2 or 3 years because Twitter is just kind of a weird cesspool of anyway, I love Twitter. But so it was Winston Duke from Us as Revan, Gemma Chan from like Crazy Rich Asians and the upcoming Eternals movie as Bastila. I think I had Javier Bardem as Canderous Ordo. I can't remember the guy's name, but the really handsome dude from A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night who like dresses up as Dracula and ends up like going home with like an actual vampire. I have him cast as Karth in that thread. I thought Leslie, what's her name? Leslie Rose from Game of Thrones, the Jon Snow's sort of girlfriend who gets killed in like season 3 or whatever.
Yeah.
Spoilers, sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
I had her as Juhani.
Oh, that would be a good one.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I had the guy who plays Frankenstein and Penny Dreadful. I don't remember his name. I had him as the Zabrak Baudur that we were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah.
I liked that for some reason. I thought that Freddie Highmore from Bates Motel?
Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
Charlie in the Chocolate Factory.
I love him in Bates Motel, and so I had him cast as HK-47's voice.
Yeah. You have a future
and
in
then-
casting, I think. So I'm like, I want to see
I know.
this movie.
I, for one, think these are brilliant castings. No, but yeah, no. And then I had Ben Foster as Malik. Ben Foster is like that actor who's like always amazing in everything he does, but like he's never really been a star for whatever reason. But he's so good.
Mm-hmm.
He's in like 3:10 to Yuma, and he's with Chris Pine and Hell or High Water. I think he'd be a great Malik. I can't remember who some of the other ones were.
Yeah.
Yeah, but those were like the main ones. I think I listed most of them. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then, what upcoming movies are you looking forward to?
Right now, this moment, I am very angry that my theater doesn't have The Night House. I really want to see The Night House. So I'm excited for that to hit VOD, I guess. I would have rather seen it at my local theater. But and then I'm really excited to go see Candyman. I'm really excited to see Halloween Kills. I'm really excited for what else? So a lot of like non-horror stuff too, but my mind's kind of a blank at the moment. I guess the Batman, like I said earlier, I loved Matt Reeves. Matt Reeves did Let Me In, which was like the U.S. remake of Let the Right One In, and he killed that. And so I'm really excited to see the Pattinson Batman. And then, I'm sure there's like a whole like other list. There's a whole list of movies that I'm excited for that I'm just kind of blanking on. But those are sort of like the immediate ones that come to mind for sure.
Yeah.
Those are the big ones, yeah.
And Better Call Saul season 6, like I want that more than any other piece of entertainment. I want Better Call Saul season 6. So.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I'm looking forward to Dune. That looks amazing. And I think it's gonna do the novel justice, and because I recently watched the David Lynch Dune movie, and I was like, oh, this is really good promotional material for like the movie coming out, because just the last half, I was like, what, they're just cramming, okay, I guess they're just cramming this in, okay, and I was like, oh, this is, I can tell, like, David Lynch just didn't have control over the cut, but, so yeah, just looking forward to Dune and The Last Duel. But what about you, Brian?
Definitely looking forward to Dune. It'll be interesting to see how Spider-Man comes together at the end of the year, right?
Yeah.
I think that's still coming out at the end of the year. So I guess I'm looking forward to it because it'll be good, but I'm also just looking forward to see how like insane it ends up getting. But I'm really looking forward to the next James Bond film because I think Rami Malek's going to be an amazing villain. So
I'm excited to just see it, you know.
And you mentioned Last Duel, which reminded me the House of Gucci is way high on my list. House of Gucci.
Yeah.
That looks amazing.
Yeah. So, and I think it's been about 2 hours, you know, so this will probably be our longest episode. We could talk forever, but, you know, like, I know you have you have things to do. But where can our listeners like find you and keep up with what you're writing?
Reviewed.com, usatoday.com. I'm on Twitter at Alex J. Kane, Kane. And I actually, I wrote 2 chapters of a book that's coming out soon that's like the sequel to Supercade. So it's like Supercade 2 is what you could call it, I guess. But it's sort of a different range of years, like 1980 something to 2000 something. And so I wrote the chapters on the Nintendo 64 and Super Mario 64. So that's coming out in like hardcover as well as paperback, and it's like a coffee table book sort of exploring video game history. So kind of excited to see that, check it out.
Oh, cool. So Alex Kane, thank you very much for coming on. We really appreciate you taking the time this evening to come on and talk about your work and, entertainment, movies, TV shows, books, talking about KOTOR and the book that you wrote, the Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic by BossFightBooks. So thank you so much for coming on, and thank you everyone at home for listening, and may the Force be with you.